evacuation of Iraq in early funding between, one of our friends from Georgia told this. He started trying to make an announcement.
This hearing of the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Subcommittee will come to order. Thank you all for participating in this hearing about Air Force installations and quality of life update. Before we begin, as this is a hybrid hearing, I like when Luke does this better. As this is a hybrid hearing, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For the members joining virtually, once you start speaking, there's a slight delay before you are displayed on the main screen. Speaking into the microphone activates the camera, displaying the speaker on the main screen. Do not stop your remarks if you do not immediately see the screen switch. If the screen does not change after several seconds, please make sure you are not muted. To minimize background noise and ensure the correct speaker is being displayed, we ask that you remain on mute unless you have sought recognition. Myself or staff I designate may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition to eliminate inadvertent background noise. Members who are virtual are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask the staff to send you a request to unmute yourself. Please then accept that request so you are no longer muted. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. In terms of the speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority, and finally members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. And this subcommittee has already come to order. Good afternoon. Today we welcome Air Force and Space Force installations officials and senior and enlisted personnel to discuss the FY23 budget, quality of life issues, as well as receive an update on installations. Today we have before us Mr. Edwin H. Oshiba, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Installations, Environment, and Energy, Brigadier General William Kale, Air Force Director of Civil Engineers. There you are, thank you. Mr. Bruce Hollywood, Space Force Associate Chief Operations Officer. You win the prize for coolest name. Chief Master Sergeant Joanne Bass, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Good to see you. And Chief Master Sergeant Roger Toberman, Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force. Good to see you as well. Thank you all for joining us today to testify about some very critical issues. We certainly have a lot to discuss. Today we look forward to engaging with the Department of the Air Force on a host of important subjects that impact our airmen and guardians. I was very pleased that the FY23 President's budget request was delivered to Congress in a timely enough manner that allows us to discuss the request in depth at this year's hearing. I was also happy to see the FY23 request was larger than what I saw as an inadequate fiscal year 22 request. But I do have to say that I'm once again concerned with what has now become a tradition of the budget request, which I hope we break, looking to reduce the funding of military construction in comparison to the previous year's enacted levels. Mr. Secretary, I mean, we have a really serious problem with infrastructure. It is incomprehensible that we are submitting budgets that are lower than the previous enacted bill. This trend not only impacts the mission readiness of our forces, but also the quality of life of service members and their families. The FY23 budget request for the Department of the Air Force is $2.85 billion. That's $930.5 million less than the FY22 enacted level of $3.8 billion. That's a 25% cut. And I recognize that the FY22 spending bill offered a particularly high mark for spending compared to recent years, but that's because it was necessary. And this type of high funding should be the rule, not the exception. In this committee, we don't debate so much DOD spending. You know, what we spend on equipment and warfighters and all of that stuff happens in the DoD bill. In this bill, we all acknowledge and we work so well together because we have a huge infrastructure problem, and we all know that we really can't appropriate enough anytime soon to catch up with the backlog, nor to catch up with the problem that we have with the failing quality of our infrastructure. So military construction, we have to underscore, is so much more than just building infrastructure and building bases. It's providing modern, efficient facilities that can weather increasingly destructive natural disasters. No one knows that better than me. It's reducing our carbon footprint through energy resilience. It's building child development centers. It's remediating contaminants left behind by our services, like PFAS. It's providing quality housing for our service members and their families. Reducing military construction funding when there is an overwhelming backlog of required priorities and when 30% of our infrastructure is in fair or poor condition is simply not good government. Beyond the FY23 budget request, we also look forward to discussing quality of life issues and an update on installations. Sexual assault is still rampant across all services, and I don't use that term lightly, including the Air Force. The subcommittee will seek out answers as to why it's still so prevalent and what the Air Force is doing about it. We'll talk about child development centers, which provide young children of our service members safe, comfortable child care, and yet they are still not receiving proper prioritization by the department. We will look for explanations as to why privatized housing continues to struggle with oversight and quality assurance, and what the Air Force is doing to ensure support for its service members. This hearing will address ongoing Air Force efforts to identify and remediate PFAS contamination across their installations, as well as replace the harmful AFFF firefighting foam that spreads so much of it into the land and water sources. Additionally, I hope to receive a full report on disaster recovery and what the department is doing to ensure our facilities are equipped to survive increasingly intense storms as a result of climate change. As you can see, we have many important issues to discuss. I really believe this hearing is a great opportunity to identify those crucial areas where we can do more to serve those who serve us, and we look forward to an open and honest conversation. And now I'd like to recognize and recommend to you my dear friend, Ranking Member Judge Carter, for his opening remarks.
And let me also confirm everything that the chairwoman said. We've got terrible issues that are going on across the board, and we just can't be reducing our budget. We are too small every year, and getting smaller is not good. But I am pleased we're having a hearing today, and we're having our FY23 budget requests from our U.S. Air Force and our Space Force, and we're proud of both of you. This subcommittee understands the important connection between the installations and readiness and quality of life programs for airmen, guardians, and their families. I look forward to the discussions we're going to have here today and to talk about the budget requests and how we balance priorities. I'd like to thank each of you for being here today and for your support for and dedication to our nation's airmen and guardians. I yield back my time.
Thank you. It seems like we're attached at the hip because we are, and you'll find, Mr. Secretary, that there's not a lot of difference of opinion among any of us. We have a very, very small number of issues in this committee that we don't share the same opinion, and we're really here, and we look at ourselves as your advocates. So thank you to all the witnesses for taking the time to be here and to share your expertise. Due to the number of witnesses, for opening testimony, we'll start with Acting Assistant Secretary Oshiba and move down the list as follows: Brigadier General Kale, Mr. Hollywood, Chief Master Sergeant Bass, and Chief Master Sergeant Toberman. Without objection, all written statements will be entered into the record, and you'll be recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement. Acting Secretary Oshiba, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chair Washman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored here to be here today with Brigadier General Kale, Mr. Hollywood, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force Bass, and Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force Toberman, dedicated, selfless servant leaders and partners representing over 700,000 airmen and guardians in the Department of the Air Force. Together, we thank you for the opportunity to testify today and provide updates to our installation investment priorities. Our nation faces an array of complex challenges in a rapidly evolving global environment. In addition to the threats imposed by pacing adversaries and other state and non-state actors that would exploit opportunities to further their interests, transboundary challenges such as climate change also demand our attention. In addressing these challenges, the fiscal year 2023 budget request supports the new National Defense Strategy by contributing to integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building enduring advantages. Coupled with the department's guiding principle of one team, one fight, we can and will overcome these challenges and provide installations which underpin our nation's security. Accordingly, we view our installations as foundational to enabling and projecting air and space combat power. The department remains committed to ensuring they are ready by investing in the right capabilities at the right time, in the right place, with a diverse, inclusive team of trained and equipped airmen and guardians. Resilient against natural and man-made threats, and balanced to be effective, efficient, and optimally postured. Since 2019, the department's infrastructure investment strategy has guided our efforts to make our installations ready and resilient through decisions meant to balance effectiveness and efficiency. The strategy informs policy and investment decisions supporting weapon system modernization and combatant command priorities, while balancing the need to recapitalize our aging infrastructure and facilities, which improve the quality of work and life for our airmen, guardians, and their families. Additionally, our strategy emphasizes adoption of smarter business practices by investing at the optimum point in infrastructure life cycles, using smarter acquisition methods, strengthening installation planning, and leveraging partnerships and third-party investment. We are cognizant that climate change and the resulting effects have and will continue to severely impact our installations and the missions they enable. Climate change effects are accelerating, and the time for action is now. The department is nearing release of our climate action plan. It will lay out objectives and key results to address the challenges of changing climate through improving operational energy efficiency, enhancing installation resilience, diversifying energy sources, and developing a climate-literate force. We also continue to emphasize continued quality of life investments in housing, dormitories, child development centers, and other support facilities. We appreciate your support for the additional child development center projects in the FY22 budget. And we will continue to balance operational priorities with preserving the readiness and resilience of our most important resource, our airmen and guardians. Additionally, the department is committed to ensuring our privatized housing projects provide safe, quality, well-maintained housing for service members and their families. With the help of Congress, our project owners are in the process of implementing the Tenant Bill of Rights, and we added over 200 government housing management positions to maintain our focus on improved oversight, long-term project health, and sustainment of the privatized housing inventory. Finally, we remain firmly committed to executing robust environmental programs and protecting human health. Regarding PFAS, no one on or off our installations is drinking water with PFOS or PFOA concentrations above the EPA Lifetime Health Advisory attributable to our operations. We developed a robust framework to identify and remediate impacted areas within our legal authorities, as well as continue to proactively work and communicate with local communities and partners at all levels. In summary, your Department of the Air Force is committed to preserving ready, resilient installations, our platforms to enable and project combat power. We employ a strategy which balances operational effectiveness and resource efficiency as one team to win our one fight. Madam Chair and Ranking Member Carter, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
General Kale, your full written testimony will be included in the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee. On behalf of your 51,000 military and civilian airmen engineers who are responsible for sustaining our Air and Space Forces installation power projection platforms around the world, I'm honored to appear before you today to discuss our fiscal year 2023 Air Force military construction budget request. I would like to begin by thanking the subcommittee for their steadfast support and generous military construction funding contained within the fiscal year 2022 Consolidated Appropriations Act. Your leadership and your staff's mentorship is making the Air and Space Forces better. I'm especially thankful for the FY22 NDAA Section 2802 Technical Amendment, which enables us to award over $1 billion worth of natural disaster recovery projects at Tyndall Air Force Base in the next few months. I look forward to working with Subcommittee on our fiscal year 2023 Air Force military construction budget requests and tackling new challenges to improve the program. Our fiscal year 2023 military construction budget requests supports the 2022 National Defense Strategy through accelerating the recapitalization of two legs of our nuclear enterprise, supporting combatant command infrastructure requirements in the European and Indo-Pacific theaters, and investing in our airmen and their families. Our fiscal year 2023 budget request remains consistent with last year's record-breaking request, but I acknowledge it is below what you enacted last year. We have also taken great strides in process improvements to create a more stable military construction program with better defined requirements that will increase the number of projects awarding in the year of appropriation, which significantly enhances our ability to keep projects on time and on budget. However, we continue to work through numerous external influences affecting this portfolio, be it from increased global market prices for commodities and labor, ongoing impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic, the effects of changing climate, and continuing resolutions. In the faces of these challenges, the Air Force continues to balance risk and installation investment with the necessity to modernize and meet our most critical mission needs. Over time, though, this has resulted in atrophied facilities and infrastructure. In order to mitigate some of this risk, we optimize the use of our military construction and FSRM funding accounts. These two funding streams serve as the foundation of sustainable air and space forces installations. Through a combination of well-timed MILCON projects and continued FSRM funding, we're able to bring on new weapon systems and combatant command capabilities while sustaining day-to-day maintenance and repair in order to maximize the lifespan of our facilities. While we remain focused on the health of our infrastructure, we always keep in mind that our installations are more than just a place where our airmen work. It's where many of them live and their families call home. Bottom line, both military construction and FSRM investment into our critical quality of life facilities plays a vital role in ensuring the well-being of our airmen and guardians, which is integral to our mission success. Lastly, over the past year, I've been able to see our airmen engineers around the world in action, implementing the programs your subcommittee appropriates. It is eye-watering to see the obstacles they overcome every day to accomplish their mission. They're making great strides to implement reforms this subcommittee expects and delivering highly complex requirements our mission demands. I particularly want to highlight the heroics and humanity of our airmen engineers on the front lines of Operations Allied Refuge and Welcome. From Kabul to Al Udeid to Ramstein to Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst to Holloman Air Force Base, our airmen engineers played a vital role in the care, bed down, transition, and future resettlement of thousands of refugees. I'm extremely proud of the performance of these airmen. Thank you again for your continued support and the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General. Mr. Hollywood, your full written testimony will be included in the record and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of your United States Space Force for our military construction program and quality of life initiatives. We are the Department of Defense's newest military service, established to organize, train, and equip space forces to protect America's interests in space and provide space capabilities to the joint force in accordance with the new National Defense Strategy. The military construction program and quality of life initiatives are vital to our mission and to the guardians and airmen who work, live, rest, and play on our Space Force bases and stations. Established in 2019, our Space Force is rapidly taking the necessary strategic steps to appropriately transition the management of our installation resourcing. As one of two services within the Department of the Air Force, and in line with our department's guiding principle of one team, one fight, we will remain intertwined with the Air Force as it provides foundational installation support to the Space Force. We will continue to team and collaborate with the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force Energy, Installation, and Environment, and the Office of the Director of Civil Engineers in the Headquarters Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection. To remain a lean service as Congress directed and in accordance with the Chief of Space Operations Planning Guidance, the Space Force leverages current Air Force installation support processes, and we are active partners in the Department's facility and infrastructure readiness initiatives. We are strategically examining our bases that may be impacted by climate change and planning resilience in our mission operations while protecting the Guardians and airmen stationed in potentially vulnerable locations. Additionally, we are participating in the energy and water resilience conversations within the department. This past year, the Space Force developed its own process for prioritizing requirements with a deliberate, collaborative planning effort that accounts for our operational and community priorities. We focused on infrastructure improvements in areas to reduce our risk to mission and reduce risk to the force by improving quality of life for our Guardians, supporting airmen, and their families. With the $68 million provided in fiscal year 2022, the Space Force will construct an addition and improvements to the Schriever Space Force Base Fitness Center, ensuring Guardian, airmen, and families' readiness and resilience at that base. We'll construct an emergency power plant fuel storage facility at Cavalier Space Force Station, ensuring 24/7 no-fail mission operations. We'll also design the headquarters Space Rapid Capabilities Office at Kirtland Air Force Base and design a secure integration support lab with land acquisition at Maui. Our fiscal year 2023 request includes $79 million to build a dormitory at Clear Space Force Station, enabling Space Force mission growth and securing the vital interests of our nation through the bed down of a new mission system. We'll advance resiliency project to stabilize a road prone to landslides at Vandenberg Space Force Base, and we will support planning and design efforts to ensure our future success. The military construction program, quality of life initiatives, and relationships with Mr. Oshiba's office and Brigadier General Kale's office are critical to performing our mission and to the well-being of our Guardians, supporting airmen, and their families. Thank you for your time today and the opportunity to testify. I look forward to our dialogue.
Thank you, Chief Hollywood. You yield back. Chief Master Sergeant Bass, your full written testimony will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your continued interest and support in the quality of life of the men and women who serve this great nation. I'm honored once again for this opportunity to address the needs of our Air Force, as well as speak with you on issues that impact our airmen and their families. I also appreciate the opportunity to be here with this distinguished panel, especially my dear friend and wingman, Chief Toberman, who, for the record, has been an airman longer than he's been a Guardian. Over the last year, despite the challenges of COVID, I've been able to continue meeting our airmen and their families during my travels, see them in action, and watch them get after our nation's business, listen to their stories, their concerns, and the unique challenges that they face as members of our Air Force family. I'm honored to be their voice and their chief, and I do not take this responsibility lightly. As America's sons and daughters serving in challenging times at the forward edge of an impending strategic competition, we all owe them our very best. More than any weapon system, program, or piece of hardware, our airmen are the greatest competitive advantage that we have over our enemies. For the past 75 years, the United States Air Force has stepped up and answered our nation's call without hesitation and without fail, and it falls on us to ensure that they have the resources required to be able to serve. Recent events have shown us that strategic competition is not some distant pondering. In fact, it is knocking on our door. And in order to continue being the Air Force that our nation needs, we must prioritize the resources our service members need to include quality of life programs that help us to retain those airmen and their families. Our Air Force and airmen must remain ready, willing, and able to deliver air power anytime, anywhere, and in an all-volunteer force, we can never, ever take that for granted. Over the past year, I've seen so many examples of our airmen working tirelessly to modernize and accelerate the changes that we need in our Air Force. They understand that rapidly evolving challenges, new domains of warfare, and near-peer competitors will define future state operations. And how we recruit, train, develop, retain, and transition them are key to readiness. We are moving out in the right direction, and I am certain we will need your continued support as this is a whole-of-nation effort. As we move forward in our strategy and focus on the Air Force of 2030 and beyond, there is much to be done. Secretary Kendall and General Brown spoke on much of this yesterday. In addition to that, we must continue to focus on foundational requirements and airmen programs that focus on the airmen themselves, their development, modernizing training, and an environment where every single airman can reach their full potential. We must also maintain the proud and rich heritage of what it means to be in a military service, while ensuring a culture and a climate where every airman feels valued and free from sexual assault, harassment, discrimination, violence, or anything that runs counter to our core values. I will be the first to admit that we have a lot of work to do here, and this is something that we can never take our eyes off of. I am deeply concerned about suicides, sexual assault, harassment, and all things that impact our airmen, their families, and our force. And there is not a day that goes by that I don't think about their health and welfare. Recently, Chief Toberman and I stood up the Fortify the Force initiative team to help identify and tackle barriers that keep our airmen from getting the help that they need. This working group and the Department of the Air Force is committed to dismantling any stigmas that surround mental health treatment and creating a culture where airmen seeking help is not shameful. We believe that this is imperative to our future success. We also deeply appreciate the sacrifices of our military families. They give so very much in their own right, and the same care and support that we provide our airmen must be extended to them. Whether it's spouse employment, child care, or quality of our schools, ensuring our families have the access and support that they need when they need it is critically important. On that same note, we can never turn a blind eye to aging and excess infrastructure. Our installations are not only key in our warfighting mission, but as General Kale said, they are where we call home. Years of competing priorities and fiscal constraints force us to manage risk and infrastructure, and we cannot continue to do so at the expense of airmen's quality of life. Whether it's in the dormitories, housing, workplaces, or where our airmen recreate, they need places and they need safe places where they can come together as a community. Those things impact airmen retention, and retention is inseparably linked to their quality of life and investment we must continue to make. Thanks again to this subcommittee for your leadership. As you make the tough decisions concerning our defense budget, please continue to keep our airmen and their families at your forefront by providing a budget that is timely, sustainable, and appropriate. That impacts the decisions that we as a service have to make every single day. We continue to be grateful for your continued support to the men and women that serve our great nation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your insights. Very much appreciated. Lastly, Chief Master Sergeant Toberman, your full written testimony will be included in the record. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair Trone now, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for asking us here today. Thanks for everything that you've been doing for us. Thanks for your opening comments. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you about your Space Force and the guardians and loved ones who make up our service. I couldn't be more honored or humbled to be their voice. From every one of us, which is now 7,108 in uniform and 6,738 civil servants and their loved ones, thank you for your service to our country and your steadfast leadership and support of our military and our quality of life. We are excited about our future and working hard every day to make it as bright as possible. We simply can't be successful without your help. Without question, the most important and decisive warfighting advantage in the history of the world is the advantage of the human beings who make up our military. No weapon system, no technology, no strategy sets us apart further or more definitively. Within that set, our most advantageous subset is the all-volunteer, highly technical, and deliberately professionalized enlisted force that Chief Bass and I represent. By every measure we have, their skills, talent, and experience continue to grow, as does the empowerment and autonomy we give them. This drives necessity and responsibility to grow our commitment to them at a commensurate rate. They are without question our most important weapon system. Like all weapon systems, they must be acquired and they must be maintained. Their quality of life is part and parcel to that effort and should never be thought of as something we do for them, but rather a necessary and essential component of our operational readiness and warfighting advantage. While their direct pay and compensation is critically important and best when sufficient and predictable, we must not ignore the rest of the ecosystem that makes up their value proposition. This is not yesterday's enlisted force. For our Space Force enlisted recruits of this year, they average 22 years of age with significant life and work experience to offer. They are more talented and more sought after than ever before. 36% of them have completed successfully some college. 14% have 4-year degrees or higher. And over half of those degrees are in our highly sought after STEM fields. In short, they have choices, and we are seeing leading indicators that young Americans' propensity to serve in the military may be waning. Real recruiting and retention challenges could lie ahead if we ignore those indicators. We must do what we can to become an employer of choice, and to that end, these discussions about quality of life are vitally important. Because much of our quality of life ecosystem is provided, as you've heard, by the United States Air Force, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank our sister service and my fantastic teammate, Chief Bass, for their outstanding support and for the thousands of airmen who enable our mission every day. We couldn't win without you, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Because we are moving quickly in uncharted space, pun intended, I'd also like to publicly thank Congress and the Department of Defense for the flexibility and authorities you've given us, specifically for things like grade allocations, end strength variance, and hiring authorities. These things continue to be vital to our success, and we will continue to use them both responsibly and to our nation's advantage. I'd also like to thank you in advance for helping establish a single component of regular and ready reserve forces, which are so absolutely necessary to our mission success. Since we spoke in this forum last year, we released our human capital plan, the Guardian Ideal. I have a copy if you'd like it, which includes our Space Force core values and other aspirations for our force. We're committed next to operationalizing those values of connection, courage, commitment, and character, and putting together our Guardian value proposition, which we believe will resonate loudly with current and future Guardians. Unfettered access to and freedom to maneuver in space simply will not happen without our most important weapon system, our Guardians. I look forward to working with all our teammates to find predictable, executable ways to invest in our quality of life ecosystem and create that employer of choice in the United States Space Force. I thank you again for today's important conversations to that end and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief, for your remarks. We'll now proceed in the standard 5-minute rounds, alternating sides, recognizing members in order of seniority as they joined or were seated at the beginning of the hearing. Please be mindful of your time and allow the witnesses time to answer within your 5-minute term. I now yield myself 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us today, both the Air Force and the Space Force. Chief Bass, let's start with you and something you already talked about, and that is we know mental health is so important to our service members and impacts their quality of life. I have a few questions in this area. I know we both care about it, and I appreciate you discussing it in your testimony. The mental health of our junior airmen. So according to the Air Force, 26% of the airmen were seeking care for some mental health related reason. That's an old number, 2014. So I can only imagine with COVID what that number has risen to. So as a leader of our enlisted airmen, could you expand upon how you use your leadership position to advocate for the mental health of our airmen, including reducing stigma and other barriers to treatment?
Acting Chair, thank you so much for that question. I'll be honest with you, I'm concerned about it deeply all the time, especially the impacts that we've had on COVID. I would offer that I don't think that this is necessarily a junior airman challenge more than it is holistically and something that impacts every single airman, every guardian, and every loved one that we have. And I think that, to the impacts on COVID, I think we have yet to see what those second and third order impacts are going to be. And so to that end, we've been working really hard on mental health, more importantly, mental wellness, and really getting left of trying to take a holistic look at how can we fortify the airmen themselves, build them up to be strong, resilient, and able to take on any tasks that they can. We believe that this is a holistic look. We're looking at a total force fitness model where whether it's mental health, whether it's utilizing our chaplain corps, SG community, other opportunities for our airmen, loved ones, and guardians to be able to connect and have community with each other. We think that it really takes all of that. I'm deeply concerned about the shortage of mental health that is not only in our service, but across the Department of Defense and quite frankly, across all of our nation. And so how do we, again, get left of the situation so we can build up and build resilient people that perhaps they don't necessarily need that mental health? When I talk to our mental health providers, and I talk with them often, they typically tell me out of every 10 airmen that come into our facilities, that out of 10 of them, only about 2 of them need clinical support. The other 8 really just need to know that they're cared about. And so to that end, we're working really hard on our leadership development that we have going on. We're working hard. That is why I mentioned, myself and Chief Toberman provided that Fortify the Force initiative team. So from a grassroots effort, we can start to hear from our airmen, how can we get after the stigma of mental health and be able to apply some initiatives to that. We also have an initiative focused on no wrong door. Like our airmen can go into a central location, and whether it's the chaplain, whether it's our mental health techs, or whether it's a life counselor, they're not going into a wrong door. We will ensure that there is a warm handoff and that person can be taken care of. Whiteman Air Force Base has a fantastic model in their Life Center where they're doing that, and we're trying to create more of that. And sir,
Touch on some unique stressors, and I think the key we always talk about physically fit. We're trying to have our folks mentally fit.
Absolutely.
And that should be the goal, and eliminate stigma when you talk about it in that way.
Yeah.
So unique stressors on the airmen that other folks don't see?
So, sir, from my vantage and my experience, most of the challenges that our airmen are having are all relationship. And so, they're typically relationship finance or whatever, but for the most part, they're relationship. And so to that end, how do we build in some training, and how do we build in that connective tissue, starting from basic training or OTS all the way up to make sure that our airmen are starting to have those conversations, to help, again, fortify them for the challenges that are going to come writ large.
And we've got to work on the infrastructure where the airmen live, with their families, because if we don't get that infrastructure right, that's going to lead to all kinds of problems down the line.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that. Quickly, Mr. Oshiba, from 3 years, I've only been in this business 3 years, but I've been in real business 37 years, and then my budget was my own. What trouble are you having with the continuing resolutions that we've continued to have year after year as you work on the infrastructure investment strategy, extending across multiple fiscal years? How do you deal with that problem?
Thank you for the question, Chair Trone. Some would probably characterize continuing resolutions as one of the more damaging things that can happen to national security. It introduces doubt, and in some cases, just volatility into how we do our business. One of the things that we've seen, I think, over time is there's sort of this cost premium that gets added on because of this uncertainty in the budget, both in terms of what that number will end up being and when that money will arrive. And I realize we're in the MILCON subcommittee here, but this is extremely acute, particularly when you talk about what happens on the O&M appropriation side in our FSRM accounts. 1 year appropriation, many of the vendors know that. Many of the vendors know that by the time we get an appropriation, now we're into the third, sometimes fourth quarter of the fiscal year when we're ready to award our projects. And there's a cost premium to that because they know that appropriation is going to expire at the end of the fiscal year. In other cases, particularly with the MILCON budget, what we see is delays in scheduling, which could impact things like new mission bed downs, or in some cases just recapitalizing projects, extended bids that expire that have to be redone, which again adds time to how we execute, particularly our MILCON projects. And as you all well know, time in this economic environment means cost. And so being able to get past that would be extremely helpful. I don't know if General Kale had anything else you want to add.
I would just say real quickly that in this environment, what we're really seeing is the bid periods are really getting cut short because the contractors they're fearful of the risk, and if we have to extend that bid period, is a lot more expensive than if we were able to award projects on time, and that's the challenge that's exacerbating our situation right now. Thank you.
Bottom line is our failure to pass a budget on time costs us all together collectively billions of dollars, and we got to do better. So I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone, and thank you for taking over for me temporarily. Judge Carter, you recognized for 5 minutes for questions. Oh, no.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Well, welcome everybody. Let's talk about the ground-based strategic deterrent program. I think you're all aware that the recapitalization of our ground-based strategic deterrent is a massive project. For FY23, the budget request, $44 million for 6 projects. Over the next 4 years, the FIDEP there is $2 billion in planned projects. First, are you on track? Second, can you execute $98 million provided in 22 in a timely manner? Third, will you be able to execute $44 million, $444 million? And finally, what are the plans to keep the program on track? The big deal.
Ranking Member Carter, thank you for that question. That you're absolutely right. That is a big, humongous project. I guess I would say overall we are on track. The projects in FY22 are nearing award. We are planning, working together hand in hand with the program office on this very unique relationship we have. This is a very different kind of program when you think about how we typically do MILCON projects. In this case, thanks to support again from Congress and how and getting some special legislation and how we're going to execute this massive program, we are tied at the hip with the program offices so that as the weapon system develops, the program or the projects are designed to support it right along the way. You're exactly right. There's close to over $2 billion across the FIDEP. But again, I think that partnership that we've established both at the program offices and down within our execution arm at the Air Force's Civil Engineers Center in Texas I've never seen it better. And so I'm very confident and optimistic that we will stay on track. And again, I don't know if General Kale wants to add anything else to that.
I agree with everything Mr. Yoshiba said. This is a once in every other generation type program, and I'm hugely proud to be involved with that, and I know the team is working hard with that. Two things that concern me most with this program: we do have tight timelines, and it's really important that we are able to bring this capability. What's interesting about this capability, it is locked, tight with the weapon system. So the MILCON and the weapon system, it's unlike any other scenario where they're very closely interlinked. The two things I'm most worried about is, number one, when we have delays with the CRs, that can have a huge impact to this program in particular, and we would ask to work with the committee here for help on that. And then number two, this is a very highly technical and complex program, and there will be times where we are going to have potential cost implications, and with the reprogramming limits at $2 million and such a low percentage, that can add a significant time increase to that program. And In similar scenario where with the natural disaster reprogramming, we would like to work closely with the Congress so that you have trust from transparency of what we're doing to ensure that we can keep this this program on track. Thank you.
Well, for that, and, let me say out there, I'm not a member of this committee or any of us who work in the area of defense. And like, when we do our diligence best, get the bill out, and I don't get the bill out, always, almost always, by July. It's crazy how this place throws down to a crawl at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I guess that part of that's politics. Subcommittee we strongly supported rebuilding Tyndall and Offutt after the natural disasters that occurred. Will more funding be needed? Will it be needed in 23 and 24? And when will all the projects be completed so we all can have a party?
Well, first, I have to thank the subcommittee here for the amazing support on this. And I will say, I think the way that we're working together with us showing you all the good, the bad, and the ugly, letting you know what's going on, I think that's been able to ensure that this program's going well. Yes, we do need more funding in FY23. That amount is included in our unfunded priority list. We have worked with your staff to provide specifics on that. And as of right now, the way the market's working and how things are going, I suspect that we will also need some money in FY24 for that. I can't give you an exact amount right now on that, but we'll work with your staff on that. As far as, when this program will complete or be complete, we're looking in FY27, 28 timeframe is when everything will be done program-wise, and we have shared that schedule with your subcommittee and can provide more specifics if required. Thank you.
Well, you were fortunate with the time it happened. You happen to have a Secretary of the Air Force that everybody in Congress knew, because she's one of our colleagues. So when she came in here and said it's serious, we took her at her word. But we were looking forward to getting that project, keeping it on track, going forward. I yield back.
Thank you, Judge Carter. The gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Obviously, we appreciate you being here, and I mentioned in my opening remarks that I think we all share the frustration that the budget request reduces spending compared to what we enacted. I think we've sent pretty strong messages about how we feel about funding in this bill, and I'm wondering if there's anyone listening in your department. The Air Force has requested $2.85 billion. That's $930.5 million less than FY22 enacted, which was $3.8 billion total, and that's a 25% reduction from one year to the next. So, Acting Secretary, welcome to your first Milcon VA hearing. So I understand that the FY22 appropriations bill was just enacted last month, but can you explain briefly how important the high level of funding was for the department, and just a sample of what you'd be able to accomplish with that?
Thank you for the question, Chair Wasserman Schultz. Just to clarify, when you talk about that high level of funding, you're talking about the FY22 enacted.
Enacted, yes.
It was incredibly helpful for us in a lot of different ways. You mentioned the importance of quality of life, and certainly we are deeply appreciative of the additional funds provided for child development centers. We'll be able to get after 5 of those using that FY22 dollars. We talked a little bit about the national disaster recovery and the $130 million that was appropriated as well to support that effort. I mentioned you mentioned climate change in your opening statement. That's something that's very, very near and dear to me. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, particularly with the work we're doing at Tyndall and Offutt, is our ability to incorporate climate resiliency features into the construction. Designing facilities with resiliency incorporated. And I think that will be extremely important moving forward as a sort of model of foundation for construction that we would want to do into the future. Those are just a few highlights, but again, I cannot thank you enough.
So, I didn't ask the question gratuitously so that you would thank us. I genuinely wanted you to walk us through a little bit of that. So now can you explain to the committee why you're asking for dramatically less money than we appropriated to you in FY22? And do you have less needs in FY23 than what we're aware of?
That's a great question, Chair. So I guess I would start off by saying, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we are pivoting toward a pacing adversary that we really haven't seen in the past 2 decades, and that requires us to modernize our force, and it lays in some hard choices in terms of what we have to do inside of our Air Force budget, actually the Department of the Air Force budget. And we do deeply care about our installations, and we care about what it does or provides to enable combat power going into the future. But we do have to make some of those hard choices. And while we recognize the fact that there are other requirements out there that continue to build over time, and there is a risk associated with that. Again, we have to balance those risks against the other priorities within the department. One thing I would say, I would add to that, and I mentioned the infrastructure investment strategy that we've had ongoing for the past couple of years now, three years to be exact. There are portions of that strategy that get after what I call non-resource policy changes to ensure that the dollars that we do spend are targeted toward the most cost-effective and the most mission-driven requirements that we have. Things like different kinds of acquisition practices, category management is one of them. Investing dollars in the part of the life cycle of the facilities and infrastructure that yields the most effective change while we're reducing overall life cycle cost. Those are other areas in which we are striving towards, so that the dollars that we do receive from you again goes the farthest.
It seems that your hard choices always come at the expense of the quality of life of your service members, of your airmen. When you make hard choices like that, when we travel around the world to take a look at the infrastructure needs of your service, we see rusted out doors that are supposed to be protecting billions of dollars worth of equipment, planes and other vital equipment that protects our national security interests. And it both endangers your airmen who use those facilities and need to make sure that they function properly, or you're looking at barracks that are decrepit and decaying and that we're making your airmen live in. Or you're not requesting funding for child development centers when you have 15,000 people on a waiting list for those child development centers. And, they're not designed, obviously, to only get child care in those facilities, but, you're falling woefully behind. It's not right. And yeah, there are hard choices, but having the quality of life of your airmen suffer for as long as you make them suffer is not right, which puts us in a position. Look, I'm thrilled to be able to be the ones that say, no, you haven't asked for enough. You're not taking care of your people. And by the way, this is equal opportunity because it happened in the previous administration too. But this committee ends up having to step up, which we're glad to do, but we shouldn't have to. So I'll stop there and defer to my next colleague. But before I do that, I just want to let you know they're about to call votes in a few minutes, and we are going to come back. So we've conferred, and we're going to recess. It's one vote. We'll go vote, and we'll come back and finish. So with that, Mr. Gonzalez, you are recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you holding this hearing. Appreciate all the panelists. I retired a Master Chief, and to the chairwoman's point, quality of life is it's operational. It absolutely transitions over to operation readiness. So Thank you for what y'all are doing. I'd also say, you know, I have the privilege of representing Lackland Air Force Base, Laughlin Air Force Base, and former Air Force Base Kelly. And my grandfather was an airplane electrician at Kelly, and my wife served boot camp at Lackland Air Force Base. And it's just an absolute honor. I would ask the secretary or anyone on the panel. I would love to take a visit to Laughlin Air Force Base. So let's coordinate. To the chairwoman's point, we have a lot of aging infrastructure, and it seems as if Laughlin in particular is the last to eat, if you will. And I just want us to spend some time and devotion doing that. You know, I'd love to get on your calendar sometime. I want to start with Chief Bass. You stated in your testimony that nearly 25% of Air Force family housing is below standard. How many of the 3,477 homes are privatized homes?
Thank you, Rep. Gonzalez, and thanks for your service while you did. Sir, I'm going to have to get back to you
Yeah.
on the record with respects to how many of those are privatized.
I can answer that. It's zero.
Fantastic.
That number was based off of overseas government-owned housing, and of the 3,477, 1,400 are unoccupied, and 2,000 are occupied, but they are safe to live in. Of the 2,077 that are occupied, we plan to divest 671 of them, and then we are planning to provide projects for about almost 1,400 of them, and we will be working with the subcommittee here because that is a significant plan that we're going to have to.
I appreciate that. I just got back from a trip from Italy and Greece, and I was looking at Army housing, but that's another thing too. And I know this subcommittee is planning additional trips. A lot of times there's nobody that directly represents these overseas bases, and they fall through the cracks just equally as well. So to the chairwoman's point earlier, any inputs y'all have, not only on the bases here at home, but also the infrastructure abroad is greatly appreciated. My next question is for Chief Toberman. I was pleased to read last week that Lackland Air Force Base will host Space Force's first all-Guardian boot camp class next month. Once again, I'd love to visit with you anytime that happens. Please, I'd love to do more there. I'm very excited that finally Space Force is starting to get its feet underneath them. My specific question is, what installation requirements does Space Force need in order to grow the force to an expected 8,600 by 2023?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the offer to come down there, Congressman, and certainly you're happy. I'm going to go down for the graduation. Maybe I'll have my office reach out, and
great.
I'm sure you'd be welcome. We're excited about that opportunity. It will be the first time that Guardians are all of their training instructors, and all Guardian course and all those new recruits will go through together. So it's pretty exciting for us culturally to be still there where they do such a good job at the gateway to the Air Force, is to give us all the logistics and all of that stuff, and that remains. But for us to kind of instill our own culture on that new team. So for the next year, I think we're set on that front. We've got all of the places where we need folks and all of the things that we need. I think as we move forward, and there's basing decisions and things to be made as we move forward. But for right now, I feel very comfortable with the footprint that we have, and with the installations and facilities that we have. Okay, great.
One point and then one final question. We were able to get a new child development center at Lackland Air Force Base over this last budget, and that was great. Randolph Air Force Base, I was pleased to see that they have a child development center on the list as well, that we're going to make that a priority. My last question is for the Assistant Secretary. Last year, one of the installations I visited was Laughlin Air Force Base. At the time, the base expected to receive funding to construct a new student officer quarters in fiscal year 23. It stated this was AETC's number 2 MILCON priority list. Laughlin is critical pipeline for Air Force pilots. Can you talk about why this vital project was not included in the President's budget?
Congressman, thanks for the question. I don't have the details for that specific one, so we'll have to take that out for the record.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman yields back. Mr. Bishop, virtually, you're recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Carter, for hosting this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for testifying. I am particularly interested in learning more about the Air Force's recent request in the budget to divest the Combat Readiness Training Center in Savannah, Georgia. The CRTC's fourth and fifth generation fighter training capability cannot be replicated anywhere else in the Air National Guard. And the CRT has unparalleled access to the airspace, the ranges, the emitters that are required for the high-end advanced training for the fourth and fifth generation fighters that were necessitated by the 2017 Enterprise Range Plan and the 2020 Enterprise Range Plan. Air dominance is a critical capability for both today and tomorrow's wars. And additionally, the CRTC is able to provide training at low cost to the Air National Guard and outperforms all of the other CRTCs in both utilization and efficiency. And divestment of the Georgia CRTC will result in the loss of the Air Force's ability to host and train tomorrow's high-end fight today. In order to assist the Georgia CRTC's mission, this committee appropriated funds for a new state-of-the hangar that is scheduled to finish construction later this year. If the Air Force divests the CRTC, what then is the plan for this new $24 million fifth generation fighter hangar at the CRTC in Savannah? And how did this infrastructure factor into the decision to divest of the CRTC? You built a new operation facility for C-130s in 2018 at a cost of $9 million and a new $13.5 million ramp in 2016 for those aircraft. And now you want to abandon that to make use of a $24 million hangar that was constructed for fifth generation fighters. I mean, what's the logic in that?
Congressman, thanks for the question. I am aware of that situation. I had a conversation this morning with members of the Air National Guard Readiness Center. We're gonna continue that conversation so that I can fully understand the rationale as well. I served on active duty for 26 years. I've actually been to Savannah, Alpena, Volksfield, and Gulfport. So many of your CRTCs, I understand the value that it brings, not just for the Guard component, but also for the active duty who have an opportunity to go there and train on their wartime skills. So that is definitely something we will continue to. I will continue to investigate, and happy to meet with you separately if you'd like, and provide you some additional details.
Yeah, this is the only CRTC that really is capable of the fifth generation fighters. It requires secure maintenance facilities and secure hangars. And of course, we're just about completed with the construction of that. It seems like an awful waste of resources now to have that capability relegated to some lesser requirement.
Mr. Bishop, was that a response that you needed from someone?
Well, let me just follow up then.
Okay.
On the issue of housing, let me ask Mr. Oshiba, does the Department of the Air Force have the necessary authorities to properly manage the private housing partners? And if you don't, what authorities would you need for this committee and for Congress to give you in order to have effective oversight?
Congressman, thank you very much for the question. We do have the authorities necessary to provide the necessary oversight. We've recently hired 218 additional government oversight members for our government housing offices, as well as to serve as resident advocates. We just finished hiring the last of those 218. All of them go through training for a week training before they assume their positions, and then we provide monthly recurring training to ensure that they have the skills necessary to represent the occupants of these homes, these families that that live in the privatized homes across across the department. So I think we
Thank
do
you. I
have the
think
resources.
it's about to expire, but I would like to follow up with you on the CRTC issue. That is very concerning to me, and I would like to get with you and your folks as soon as we can possibly get together on that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back.
You're back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. The gentleman yields back as votes have been called. As I said, the subcommittee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. Members will just go vote. It's one vote, and we'll come right back. Subcommittee stands in recess. Subcommittee will come to order. We'll return to the member questioning, and Mr. Valadao, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all our panel here for taking the time today. And I know it's been touched on quite a bit, but this is something that is important. It's affecting a lot of our districts, so I hate to be repeating ourselves, but it's important that we do emphasize the importance. On fiscal year 22, Milcon budget provided historic increases for family housing modernization, and I hope to see the fiscal year 23 continue in that trend. It was noted that a majority of these funds will be contracted out to privatized housing companies to modernize existing housing units. As we've all heard in a hearing a few weeks ago on privatized military housing, there are still many outstanding concerns with some of the units these companies manage. I've had a lot of issues, and I know in my district it's Naval Air Station Lemoore, but I've been to a few bases around the state of California that also have other issues. So what are you doing to ensure the money being spent on housing modernization is resulting in the quality homes our service members obviously deserve? I've got a few follow-ups, so this could be quick, hopefully.
Thank you, Congressman. I'll try to be quick about that. We do have a very stringent oversight process with our team down at the Air Force's Civil Engineers Center, who kind of oversees the entire, not just the privatized housing program, but also the government family housing program as well. I guess one thing I would share with you that we have learned over a period of time is that some of these deals, when they were put together, going on almost 20 years now, the financial structure of these deals were probably what I would call somewhat high risk. They were based on assumptions made in terms of what we would see in terms of the trajectory of the basic allowance for housing. We financed them with a lot of equity that the companies that took over the housing put into the deal, and we conveyed a lot of old homes. Out of the 50-something thousand privatized homes we have, 18,000 of them were conveyed sort of as is. And when you think about what those as is housing were, many of them were old Capart housing built in the mid 60s to late 70s. Or early 70s. That's what I experienced when I was stationed at down in Georgia, and it's been something that we will have to address in the years coming up.
So in this follow-up might be a better question for the record, but what do you see? What do you have? Do you have a revised breakdown of the condition of all the base housing units across the Air Force installations? For example, what percentage of houses have been updated in the past decade, and what percentage are still in need of modernization? I assume that's for the record.
Yeah, if we could get that for the record.
So then I'll move on. Fiscal year 23 budget did not have a request for construction funds for brand new housing. I know we've talked about this a bit last year, but several bases don't seem to have enough housing available. And since we last spoke, has there been any conversations on how we can provide alternative or temporary housing solutions? The reason why I'm asking this question is earlier this year, or late last year, I went up to Beale Air Force Base north of Sacramento and spent some time up there. There was some really old housing there. It was all torn down because it was in really bad condition. I think there was 1,500 units, if I remember correctly. Tore them down. They built 500 new ones. So obviously there's a shortage there. Then you include the situation with COVID, where people were moving out to rural areas. That added some more pressure to the housing situation there. And then you bring up the fires that we had, burning down some of the homes along the foothills there and up into the mountains. That added even more pressure, and that made it just the more difficult for our airmen that are living in that area, servicing that base. So what's being done to help with those, and why aren't there some new houses? Why don't we get back to at least the numbers that base used to have?
Yeah. Congressman, that's a great question. So one of the things that we continue to do is what's called a housing requirements market analysis, or HRMAs, and we do those periodically to ensure we understand what's happening in the local housing market. It's been the department's policy for some time now that we will continue to count on the local communities to provide sort of that first source of homes. And as we've all experienced over the past several years, that market has changed quite a bit. And so what we are doing is in certain areas that we know that the housing market is extraordinarily volatile, we're going to go back in and do these housing market analysis to determine what is the real requirement, what is the conditions out there, so that we can address shortfalls in housing, not just in numbers, but in some cases in cost.
All right. Well, I know we're coming up on time. I think I'll have another opportunity to follow up, but appreciate the time, and I'll yield back. Oh.
If you want to continue, you
I'll
probably
continue
would
then.
not have.
This year, I've spent a lot of time visiting various National Guard and reserve facilities in Central California. I've been quite surprised at the state of repair some of the facilities we're in. How do you prioritize modernization of the Guard and reserve facilities?
Congressman, for the Guard and Reserve facilities, they are allocated a certain portion of our overall budget for both MILCON and for FSRM based upon their plant value relative to the entire plant value of the Department of the Air Force. And certainly we do adjust that based upon unique requirements or things that they might bring in. But internal to both the Guard and Reserve components, they do their own prioritization, if you will, ensuring that they are addressing the needs that they see fit. And as we have brought on the Space Force, it is very much the same way.
All right. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back, and I yield myself 5 minutes. So on Tuesday, April 26th, a day that will also live in infamy, the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and I know you know this was coming, released a report suggesting that Balfour Beatty has continued to engage in similar and, quote, ongoing mistreatment, unquote, of military families since the last known cases of fraud in 2019. The panel's probe covered homes at Fort Gordon, an Army base in Georgia, and Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Acting Secretary Oshiba, as discussed in this subcommittee's recent MHPI oversight hearing, military privatized housing, and subsequently in a Senate Subcommittee on Investigations report released on Tuesday, Balfour Beatty has allegedly continued the same types of fraud and mistreatment that got them into trouble between 2013 and 2019. One specific location cited was Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. Is the Air Force aware of the situation, and what are you going to do to address it?
Thank you very much for the question, Chair Wasserman Schultz. So I watched that hearing in its entirety on the 26th, and we are certainly very aware of what Balfour Beatty was found guilty of, if you will, over the past couple of years. We've also put in place oversight specifically for BBC, as well as another owner as well, based upon what we have seen over a period of time. So we understand what they have done.
Let me just make sure I get that right. So you have a different company that has also subsequently been found to have engaged in mistreatment?
It's what we have seen in terms of their performance. So let me correct the record for that. So we understand what BBC has done. We have put in place a performance incentive plan or performance improvement plan, if you will, to continue that oversight specifically to ensure that does not happen again. We review their third-party audits, both financially as well as their work order management, and we'll continue to oversee that while they're on probation through 2025.
Okay, so my recollection is that Balfour Beatty already paid something like $65 million in fines for the previous violations and mistreatment and outrageous treatment of service members in military privatized housing, and now they've been caught doing it again. What's the pain point for the Air Force? I mean, when, and are we at the point where the Air Force believes that Balfour Beatty has finally done enough harm to revisit the housing partnership and severing ties between Balfour Beatty and the Air Force? I understand all of the twisting and intertwined, complicated contracts and all of that, but they don't appear that they're ever going to get it. And they appear to be, and other companies might apparently do as well, doing everything they can to cut corners, save money, abuse their great privilege that they've been given to take care of our service members and their families. And they are mostly only interested in making money and on the backs of the suffering of the people who we house in the housing we've turned over to them.
Chairwoman, as I mentioned, we provide specific oversight over this house or this privatized owner to a degree that I would say goes beyond what we do for others as well, given what their performance has shown in the past, given the findings of
Well,
the Department of
apparently not.
Justice. And we will continue to do that. We will continue to provide.
Apparently not. No. This is a real question. What's the pain point? Have you begun discussing severing ties with them and no longer continuing to do business with this company that doesn't care that, $65 million was a rounding error, a cost of doing business, and now they've done it again? And are they going to be subject to more, penalties? They certainly should be. Incentivize. My definition of incentives, at least in my experience, is through money. We're not giving them money to, I hope, to make sure this doesn't happen again. What do you mean by incentives?
For the record, or a correction to what I said before, it's a performance improvement plan that they're on, and that's again not an incentive. It's just basically additional oversight we provide, specifically to look at what the results of their work order performance management, the results of the audit, both on their finances by a third party, as well as the audit on their work order performance. We will continue to do that. We will continue to work with investigative organizations, be it the Department of Justice or others that may look into this, and if necessary and if proven, and certainly that is an action we'd be willing to take.
What's an action you'd be willing to take?
If look at different alternatives to include potentially terminating them, but I think it has to be founded on fact and evidence that are provided by investigative
How many more
organizations.
facts do you need? They've already horrendously abused the trust that we invested in them. They've mistreated our service members. They allow them to live, endlessly in poor conditions. They don't fix things. They don't follow up. They have terrible communication. You have a retention problem. We've had 2 whole hearings on this, and you're losing people who would otherwise commit their careers to the Air Force, but they don't want to commit their family members to the godforsaken housing that apparently there's not a commitment to ensure gets better.
Chair, you have my commitment that we will continue to provide that oversight that's necessary to ensure that they deliver on their terms of their project.
Are they still getting incentives during the performance improvement plan?
I do not know specifically, but that's certainly something I can check into.
Okay, see, the problem with you not knowing specifically is that we take the question for the record, and then we don't get the answer on the record. So, can someone check now? We'll be here for a few minutes. So, I'd like someone to check now whether or not they are still getting incentives during their performance improvement plan, and has the Air Force paid incentive fees to Shepherd Air Force Base during the time period of November 19 to January 22. Chief Master Sergeant Bass, while we're waiting for the answer to that question, our recent subcommittee hearing on military housing privatization initiative discussed continued quality of service issues and unacceptable housing conditions. What's the Air Force doing to ensure that its service members and their families are being supported when living in privatized housing? And how is the Air Force making sure that the right people are in the right positions to help service members when they are seeking help with their housing issues? Because it didn't seem like much has changed from our first hearing to our most recent one.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thanks for your concern of our airmen. I'm deeply concerned too, and mostly deeply concerned because, while we might think sometimes centralized that things are going well, we find out otherwise when we go and talk with our airmen. I will tell you that the challenges that we've had over the past several years has really, as Mr. Oshiba identified, put a spotlight onto those project owners. And so with that spotlight, we have really empowered our command teams as well as our the tenants more than we ever have before, with our command teams now being able to actually institutionalize, if you will, groups where they can come together to be able to find out what are the challenges that our airmen are going through. We've also put people in position within those housing locations as advocates to be able to allow our airmen to be able to get after some of those things.
But it's not gotten better.
You
Something's not working.
Yeah.
And the problem with something not working is that Balfour Beatty in this instance, even though they knew they were paying a fine, kept doing what they were fined for.
Yeah.
For like 4 more years. that we know of. And it's probably continuing to this day.
Yeah.
So something is not working.
I would offer, Madam Chair, that it, right, that depends. In some of our locations, actually, by the way, I've, had an opportunity to live on many of our installations, coming from Keesler Air Force Base, where we had significant mold issues there as well, and some other locations, Goodfellow Air Force Base, where I, again, was a tenant on base. I would offer that it really depends. We are not where we need to be. A lot of that is challenges with, again, the project owners that we have to hold accountable. But in many of our locations, things have gotten better. I've got a firsthand experience of witnessing the mold situation at Keesler get better. And so it will take time, it will take investment, it will take us holding those project owners to the test. But I'll tell you, there's not an installation that I go to that the command teams are not involved and concerned about the welfare of every single one of their airmen. And what we can control in terms of being able to make sure that our airmen that do have to get displaced, or the guardians that might have to get displaced, we are taking care of them as much as possible to relieve the pressure and the stresses that it's causing them as well as their families.
Well, we've heard testimony from them, and I don't think that you've done enough. And I'd just like to know, Chief, if you repeatedly violated the standards that were expected of you, and your boss, your next person up who supervises you, put you on a performance improvement plan. And in spite of that performance improvement plan, you continue to do what you what you were put on the performance improvement plan in the first place for. What would happen to you?
In that scenario, Madam Chair, if it was about me and my boss, I would probably not have a job.
Right. Yes. So why are we continuing to allow Balfour Beatty to have contracts and put our trust and millions of dollars into their pockets and allow that to continue?
Madam Chair, we will definitely have to take some of this for the record. I'm not an expert in contractual law, but I definitely want to be able to come back to you with things that, again, matter for our airmen and their families.
Well, I will tell you that I am going to be looking towards what language we can include in this bill, and working with Chairman Smith in the Armed Services Committee and our fellow ranking members to address this. Because if you don't take care of our service members, then we will. Okay, perfect timing.
I know.
So I yield back.
By the
and
hair of my
I
chinny
recognize
chin, right?
Ms. Lee for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to all the witnesses today. I represent Southern Nevada, and I work closely with the leadership and the fine men and women at Creech and Nellis Air Force bases. And unfortunately, they face a longstanding issue of the insufficient dormitory space. This runs contrary to the Air Force's requirement that first-term airmen reside in dorms for 3 years until they earn the requisite rank. Nellis currently is 486 dorm beds short, forcing them to move young enlisted members out of the dorms after just 12 months. Although Nellis's deficit is greater than many bases, this shortage of dormitory space exists across the Air Force, and it forces junior airmen into difficult financial situations. And while this committee works to pursue solutions for specific bases through the military construction process, it's clear that we need a broader solution here, or else our service members will continue to struggle in a housing market that is often prohibitively expensive and difficult to navigate, and that certainly is true in Southern Nevada. Mr. Oshiba, I wanted to ask you, we know that this problem's not true. What is the Air Force doing to address this current mismatch in capacity, between capacity and the guidance?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for the question. We are aware that of the shortfall in the Nellis and Creech area. We do have two dorm projects that we are currently going through the requirements for in terms of doing the programming into the FIDEP. In the meantime, we are working with the community in our personnel community to increase their basic allowance for housing and basic allowance for subsistence to ensure that that they can compensate for the increased cost of housing. The BAH rate at Nellis went up 12% between 21 and 22, specifically to account for that. And we continue to work with the communities to see if there's other options available beyond just the typical Milcon construction, if you will, just to understand, because it's a long process, as you well know, of getting things built.
What's the time frame on these dorm projects?
We don't currently have it in our future years defense program. Right now, it's just being developed as a potential future project.
Yes.
Congresswoman Lee, thank you so much. If I can add a few points on that, until those solutions are had where we actually have some Milcon and things going to be able to take care of our service members, we are actively trying to figure out some creative ways to get after this. And so we appreciate the community support that they're doing. We're looking at partnering with Nevada State as they have some capacity. And so we're looking at that. We've seen that model work out well in San Angelo State University out at near Goodfellow Air Force Base. And so we're trying to get creative about that. You did mention the airmen who are getting out within 12 months. Typically, they stay into the dorms upwards of 3 years. I'll tell you that's not necessarily uncommon at any of our Air Force bases, but prior to our airmen going out, the intent always is, and I have a college kid, the intent always is, one, they're going to be able to take care of themselves financially. And so there is a lot of leadership oversight with their first sergeants, with their command teams, to make sure that the airmen that we're sending out the right airmen who are financially ready, who are responsible and able to go out and do those things. But again, our first priority is really to those airmen and making sure that we're not putting them in a dilemma. But we appreciate the community support that we're getting from those locations, and we need more of it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, housing's an issue
Yes,
in
ma'am.
Southern Nevada. So happy to hear that you do additional wraparound support, because what we don't want to see is airmen see their careers derailed because of having to navigate this situation. I'm going to turn to suicide prevention really quickly. I welcomed the review, the establishment of the review committee in the NDAA. Nellis Air Force Base is one of the 8 installations selected for visits as part of this review. I know we're going to expect the report here soon. Mr. Ashiba, can you speak to the concrete steps that the Air Force has taken in the last year to address mental health and suicide prevention, and what tangible programs or steps we can expect in the coming year?
Congresswoman, I apologize, but I don't have the details specific to that. I'm not sure if either the chiefs do.
Sir, I would love to take that
Thanks.
on, Congresswoman. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I don't think you were able to be here, but, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not deeply concerned about suicide. But more importantly, how do we get left of that, and how can we take care of our service members and their families in a better way? So we are taking a broader, holistic look at mental health in all forms, right? The wellness of them physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. We've got 17 of our bases that have a True North program, if you will, where we have embedded support at those locations. For all of our other installations, what we're trying to do is just have a menu of options for those installation commanders to be able to have all the supporting agencies where they need them, when they need them. And we're also promoting that we try to get all of those supporting agencies under one roof, where there is no wrong door for our airmen to walk into and get the help that they need. Lots of efforts. The other one that I did mention in my opening comments that I'm championing with my teammate Chief Toberman right here is we established a grassroots effort called Fortify the Force Initiative Team. And that team is really comprised of airmen, guardians, loved ones, veterans, of all sorts, really starting to come up with what are the stigmas associated with mental health, and how can we as a force be able to get after that. We're killing any of the bureaucracy from their ideas and their thoughts by allowing us to champion these things. And so we look forward to the progress we're going to make with that, again, getting after the total force fitness, ma'am.
Thank you. I was out at Creech, and one initiative that I thought was incredible was they have a chaplain on site who is there available. So it's part of the daily operating procedure. It's not a you go and ask for it. It basically is part of what their operations are. So I thought that was a good way to break down the stigma and make sure that people understand that mental health is primary health and it's part of their job. Madam Chair, I have one more question. Can I ask? I'll ask it quickly, sorry. Only because this is a big issue. Creech Air Force Base, irregular work schedules, lengthy commutes. Nevada obviously has a child care shortage issue as the rest of the country, and I wanted to know either Mr. Ashiva or Chief Master Sergeant Bass, what actions can we expect from the Air Force in the coming year to materially improve child care options, especially for a location like Creech?
Congresswoman, I'll take maybe a first swing at it, maybe the chief can add in. We are putting in place several different programs to provide some additional assistance beyond just sort of what I call the brick and mortar CDC solution. Child care fee assistance program, $21.3 million budgeted in FY22 specifically for that. To date, we haven't denied any fee assistance to any eligible military-connected family, and we are committed to maintaining that support for Department of the Air Force families moving forward. The 23 budget request includes $31 million, so we're going to increase that for child care fee assistance. And that increase, again, reflects the continued growth of the program participation, which I think is just another alternative to the traditional brick and mortar efforts that are out there. And I know one other thing that, particularly within the personnel community and services community that we are looking very hard at, and we sort of touched on it in different places, was sort of this nationwide shortage of child care providers. And if there's things that we can do when we're looking at things like how can we increase wages so that we are competitive with the market, or in certain places we are increasing that wage above market rates, again, to ensure that we attract and retain the kind of child care providers we need for our families. Chief?
Yes. Congresswoman, again, not a day that goes by that I'm not thinking about childcare. I had 2 children myself that, as a dual military family, we had to they went into childcare from the day they were born. I would offer two challenges that we have. One is capacity. One is being able to hire the right staff and being able to have that staff. Where we are still waiting on capacity when it comes from things that are, Mr. Oshiba is working on, we're really focused on, well, then how do we get the right staff into the seats. And so we have a working group that is very focused on that very thing, providing incentives. But the challenge that we have is, COVID didn't do us any favors with respects to hiring people. The health protection levels, the staff availability, quarantines, all of those things were not helpful. Nonetheless, our managers are out there at every one of our installations, really beating the streets, trying to be able to hire the right people. And oh, by the way, they are, challenged with they're competing against, downtown locations, or competing against McDonald's and, other places that really do offer fantastic incentives. But we've taken a really strong look at our internal hiring processes, making sure that they're effective, but they're, as easy as we can make them to be able to onboard some of the best people. But we've done also a lot of other pretty good things to take care of them. We've got militarychildcare.com. We've provided home community care that takes care of our Guard and Reserve brothers and sisters. We have a child care coordinator on every single one of our locations who their whole job is to figure out the people, especially on those different work schedules, to be able to help get after that. With respects to Creech, I'm concerned about those parents who have who have to drive 35, 45 minutes away. But I will tell you, I'm very proud of the folks at Nellis and what they've done to be able to get after that, because Nellis has to take on those child care responsibilities. They have done a lot of work to be able to get after family child care at homes. They've coordinated where I believe there's upwards of 150-ish families and child care locations in the northwest part of Las Vegas to help limit some of that downtime, to be able to take care of them. They've established MOAs with the YMCAs to try to help get after child care. So again, a big challenge, but opportunities for us to, again, capitalize on our communities, and we're taking hard looks at this, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging.
You're welcome. That's how we roll here. And thank you for your excellent line of questioning. Mr. Oshiba, I assume you have an answer to the questions I asked you about performance incentives still being
Madam Chair,
given.
I do. So I can confirm that at least for the Air Force projects, We have not issued any performance incentive fees since 2019. And I mean, none have been approved since that point in time.
For
We'll
any
continue-
company? For either Hunt or Balfour Beatty? For any?
For BBC specifically.
For Balfour Beatty.
Right.
Okay. And that is directly related to their past unacceptable performance?
Directly related to the past performance, as well as and again, we continue to monitor their performance through that third-party auditor that was put in place, so that there's no potential for doctoring anything or for any kind of bias.
Okay, and we'll check with the rest of the services as well. And if you could, for the record, let us know about Hunt, because they obviously engaged in the same kind of conduct.
Madam Chair, we will check.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I thank the members for their participation as well as our witnesses. That concludes today's hearing. Your updates and perspectives are going to be very valuable to us as we start to prepare the chairwoman's mark for FY23. We appreciate all of your service, and I trust that we've thickened your skin a bit today, but it's better than tearing it off. So, there's that. The committee staff will be in contact with your budget office regarding questions for the record. I know we have a number of those to submit, and would imagine other members of the subcommittee do as well. So if you'd work with OMB to return the information for the record to the subcommittee within 30 days from Monday, we'll be able to publish the transcript of today's hearing and make informed decisions for FY23. I want to remind members that our next hybrid hearing on research at the Department of Veterans Affairs is on Wednesday, May 11th at 2 p.m. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.